Welcome to The Real Recovery Show. We air every Friday at noon, and we have different topics. Sometimes we interview people. Sometimes we talk about a topic. Sometimes it's something appropriate for the time, like Veterans Day or New Year's Eve or something. Sometimes we have authors we interview who are experts maybe on a specific subject like PTSD. So if you haven't seen any of our previous episodes, please go check them out. Today's episode is going to be on a topic that has, over time, I've learned more and more and more about this topic. I have 24 years clean and sober off of alcohol and drugs. I've also been afflicted with other types of addictions, as well as food and workaholism, sex addiction, love and codependency issues, etc. And I've had to heal from complex PTSD. I still have some PTSD that comes out whenever something comes up to heal, but excuse me, it's been the idea of powerlessness has been something that has changed over the years, because I felt honestly so incredibly helpless sometimes growing up, and then I felt too powerful, you know? And so we're going to talk about powerlessness. We're going to talk about, and in alignment with what 12-step recovery would also speak to that topic. Now, little disclaimer, and I'm joined here with Tay
Hi.
As well. But we're not affiliated with any particular 12-step program. We're not speaking on behalf of Narcotics Anonymous or Alcoholics Anonymous or any anonymous program. But we are speaking to the principles and the understanding that we all, as anybody who's in recovery, we learn and we move through and use as tools to help us to go through our spiritual awakenings. So take what resonates with you and leave the rest. We don't speak as an authority even on the 12 steps, and we're only sharing our experience, strength, and hope. So powerlessness versus helplessness. Like I was saying earlier, when I was growing up, I would, and this is going to date me, but I would actually listen to Anthony Robbins on tape cassette. And I would wake up in the morning and I would listen to that, and I would drink cups of coffee because caffeine always came with motivation for me. And I would pump myself up and I would work out and I would get myself going, like, cheerlead myself on that I could do the thing, whatever it is that I felt like I needed to overcome. Only it felt like over time that the thing that I needed to overcome felt like it was growing within me, like more shame to overcome, more guilt to push away, more fear to move through. And not having any healthy tools, I ended up accumulating all of this dysfunction and became so uncomfortable in my own skin that I turned to alcohol and drugs and food. And food was actually one of my first addictions. It's obviously one of the easiest things to get when you are a kid, and so that's not hard to imagine. But as soon as I would feel like I needed more energy, I would eat food. Feel like I needed more power, I would eat food. And feel like I needed to numb out, I would eat food. And so from there was alcohol and pot, and then pills and etc. And the whole idea of eventually being, somehow I got to be better than I am. I got to have more than I do, or be somewhere else but here. And that's how I started living. And that is something I was to later find out well into recovery, of what really was the powerlessness that I was experiencing, right? Because when we first get into our recovery, we just know that we're having some really negative experiences, and we've gotten to a place where we can't imagine our life with or without the substance or the behavior that we are bottoming from. And so our first admittance might be that we're powerless over alcohol, or we're powerless over drugs, or we're powerless over, and I don't know how many of you know about the game Mad Libs, right? Where there was always the nouns that were empty, and then the verbs that were empty, and the adjectives and the adverbs, and you would just plop in whatever goes in there, and then you would come up with these really funny paragraphs and stories where you would put in people's names and funny things and whatever like that. But to me, That's what recovery is to me. It gets to a point where you start to recognize that maybe I'm not just powerless over alcohol. Maybe there's more, and as the student is ready, the teachers appear, and I bottom from other things. I start to recognize where my false power is running the show, myself, my ego, my story of who I think I need to be, and where I am causing my own misery, where I'm causing my own conflict in my relationships. And so when I was growing up, I ran on stories about who I thought I needed to be, and I would pump myself up, and I would be better than, and I would be intense, and I would be more accomplished, I would be more intelligent, I'd be prettier, I'd have all the cash and prizes, and then something would happen, some humbling experience, humiliating experience, and down I would go into my own pitiful morass of shame, of insecurity, etc. And a lot of my interactions with people were trying to keep dancing this dance to become the person that I thought would be lovable, that I thought would be safe, that I thought would be powerful, that I thought would be invulnerable, so that I wouldn't get hurt, and so that I wouldn't get embarrassed, so that nobody would be able to say a thing. And the perfectionism that comes off of that, and the self-abandonment, and the false self, and the fear of being seen, and the fear of intimacy that just comes off of all of that. I would keep people at an arm's distance, and I would never want them to see what was going on with me. And so over time, that would build up, and I would become more toxic because I wasn't dealing with and finding peace within myself for whatever was going on. And so I would vacillate. I would vacillate between this false power, and I would swing past normal, any kind of balance, any kind of true self-experience, and I would go to feeling sorry for myself. And so I experienced a lot of intense, steamrolly or push forward or control issues, lots of those, and, attachments to results, and, needing things to be a certain way. And then I would just be like, I don't know anything, and I would just go into depression and suicidal ideations, etc. Now, if you're listening, not everybody's had such big swings in their life, but I feel like, and it's really important in recovery, that we all listen for the similarities and not the differences, and we'll touch on more about that later. But because everybody does have the same feelings, and everybody does have the same fears, just different ones in different levels of intensity for each person, that everyone can identify with a feeling of false power, being better than, and everybody can identify with the idea of helplessness, of the idea of hopelessness, of the idea of unworthiness. And so so there's a lot to the topic of powerlessness. So if you're new to recovery, stay tuned. And if you've been in recovery a while, hopefully you'll get something else out of this hour that'll help to enrich your program even more, and to give you more insight into, for yourself, to have a deeper relationship with that word, powerless. One of the things also when I was growing up is I believed that I was a victim. I had a very victim perspective. When I was angry and I felt very powerful, you couldn't tell me that when I was angry that I was really a victim. You couldn't tell me that. Mm-hmm. That was not a thing. But I was. I was at the effect of other people, and I was telling myself that if they did something different, I'd be okay. Yeah. And I was making them a little false god in my life or the situation, and I felt helpless and scared And that wasn't acceptable to me. And so in my mind, if you're the problem, then I'm going to make you change or leave you, you know? And so that's what I did. And I operated from the perspective of being a victim, where my whole mentality was that things happened to me. Like every time something happened over the years, I would interpret it as it happening to me. Like I didn't trust the universe. I didn't trust myself, and I didn't trust anyone else. And I certainly didn't trust God. And so everything became that victim perspective. And they call that in adult children of alcoholics, it's one of the 12-step programs, they call that learned helplessness. And so we could feel a sense that we're always helpless, that we're always, like, air quote, powerless. But helpless and powerless are not the same thing. Hopeless and powerless are not the same thing. And it's important to know that, because whenever we're going back and we're wanting to heal the scripts of our programming that are making us run on this stuff, that makes us interpret everything that's going on in our environment, where we're affirming that we don't have what we need, we are going to just keep breeding more fear, more anger, more depression, more sadness, more apathy, etc. And so instead of victim, we start to practice ideas like things not happening to me but for me. And even if it's not something that I necessarily see as what I thought I wanted, as we go through our recovery, we start to trust more in the process, and we recognize it's what I needed.
I was thinking about some of what you were talking about with, for me, I would say my first addiction was lying. You know, I was pretty young when I started drinking. I was pretty young when I started self-mutilating, but telling a story was definitely my first inclination. And a lot of that has to do with that idea of being the victim of, or the, you know, like it's their fault because this is the story that happened, you know? And I was just sitting here thinking about that piece and how that is where my victim perspectives came from. Like, you know, because if I could blame the whole thing on my sister, then it wasn't my fault anymore, right? Or if the situation that happened I had no part in, it wasn't my fault anymore. And, you know, this is something that I still, like, find myself battling. Like, I still find myself battling, not wanting to say what's going to make the other person happy instead of the truth. And there's a real, like, knowing the difference between powerlessness and helplessness in that, because I'm not helpless. I'm powerless over a lot of situations. I was thinking about, like, the COVID season and how there was a snapshot of it where I was completely alone and I felt powerless, but I wasn't really, you know, like there were things I could have done differently. There were people I could have reached out to differently, but I was living on this story of I'm all alone. Nobody cares about me. It's just me and my cats. And that wasn't actually true, as you know, when you pulled me out of my house and made me come hang out with you. You know, and so there's little things like that where, you know, it just I was just really thinking about, like, those different stories that I grew up on and, like, the way that they shaped me today and how long it took me. I talk about peeling the onion, and how, like, when we first get off of drugs and alcohol, like, not being homeless anymore is that first layer, right? Yeah. But there are so many layers to it, and there's so much, there's so many things that you learn as you go on. I'm going to be 16 years clean and sober next month, and I am just hitting the surface of some of those things, you know? And
more gets revealed.
Yeah, and it gets harder and uglier, and that's why they call it peeling the onion.
And then it gets easier, and then it gets harder, and then it gets uglier, and then it gets easier.
That's why they call it peeling the onion, because it takes a lot of tears. You know?
But you get down to the more of the core of it, and as we get down to the core of it, we're finding that these were really the drivers of the other buses. Like as we were facing our powerlessness over maybe our addictions, which were symptoms of our thinking. And then we started looking at our thinking and our behaviors, and we started looking at that and finding, well, those things were driving the bus, but what were driving those things? Why are we holding on to those ideas? And you brought up your experience, like where you felt like you were powerless, but our thoughts are so powerful in a sense that if we think a thought and we believe something, we will experience it as if it's true.
Right.
We will experience it. And so when we are experiencing it as if it's true and we're not actually willing in the moment to take responsibility for our thoughts and to recognize that maybe this is just the screen I'm seeing and that my mind is really the projector. And so this screen is the people, the situation, the job, the relationship, school, whatever. And what I'm seeing is my interpretation based on my stories about me, based on my guilt, based on my fear, based on my resentments that I haven't released. And so I'm going to react and I'm going to interpret. And I'm going to interpret based on that victim perspective, not because I am a whiny person or something like that, but because I have stories where I felt like my life would have been so good and I would have had all the things I needed if it wasn't for X, Y, Z.
Right.
If it wasn't for that person, if it wasn't for my parents, if it wasn't for the government, if it wasn't for the da-da-da-da-da-da.
Yeah.
You could really fill out that.
Yeah.
And everybody has I would have this if it wasn't for that, And so we have this kind of need for it to be like this hot potato of responsibility. Like we don't want to feel like it's our fault. We don't want to feel like the reason why we're in the situation we're in is because of us. And so because we think of that idea from guilt or a shame perspective, but we learn to actually think of that idea as the path to freedom, where without guilt and without shame, we get to go, I believed that thing. And when I was running on that idea, I felt this feeling. And when I was feeling those feelings that were really uncomfortable because I was telling myself a scary story and I was believing it, I ended up reacting to this person. I reacted to this person as if they were doing the thing to me that I was afraid they were doing based on the story that I had that had nothing to do with them, that was charged up with something else, right? And so as we start to go, kidding, sorry, that wasn't you, kidding, sorry, that wasn't you, that wasn't really about that, and we start to process, we're able to go, this part, that was definitely stuff that you're involved in, that's you, but that's okay. My stuff is why I was out of accord with my intuition, why I was maybe self-seeking and looking for a situation that I shouldn't have been looking for, or whatever. But we learn to shift out of more of the victim of the things happening to us, and that we would have stuff if it wasn't for someone else, and we shift to the things are happening for us. And when they are happening for us, sometimes the very thing that its purpose is to trigger up. It pisses us off first, the truth pisses us off first, and then goes, now would you like to know what the truth is?
Yeah.
Now would you like to go a little bit deeper and find out what's really driving your bus? Another thing is an attitude of, and I've had this in spades, and I catch myself every once in a while doing this idea of self-importance, where I go, I have to this, and I have to that, and I have to this, and I get overwhelmed. And as I get overwhelmed, I start getting stressed. As I start getting stressed, I'm disconnected. I'm running on a story about what needs to happen, and there is nothing worse for me. And I've been through some gnarly stuff. But there's nothing worse than putting me in a time pressure cooker, because I go from being a very sweet, loving, my opinion, person to snippy and irritable and angry if really one more thing goes on my list that I wasn't prepared for. And I did it to myself. right? I did it to myself. There is no have to's. There's I get to's, and there is pauses when I'm agitated, and when I pause and I say, okay, what was that? Why did I come out that way? What was really going on for me? And I ask through my intuition, what's really going on here? Because there's this cool saying that says, God gives you what you can handle, and you take on the rest. And you can, just like Mad Libs, you could take the word God and you could put in as a disclaimer anything: higher self, universe, collective consciousness, true self, whatever, right? But if God gives me what I can handle and I take on the rest, then in the moment when I'm overwhelmed and feeling a little bit on the verge of helplessness and feeling maybe a little homicidal, then in that moment, I am obviously either doing more and thinking I need to do more that day than I need to, or I am telling myself that the situation or what my part in it is, or the results of it, are way more important than they are. And it goes back to this idea of powerlessness being tapped into the idea that I think I know what my highest good looks like, and I think it's not happening in that moment. And so practicing the tool of I get to rather than I have to. If you haven't already heard this, just try it, practice it. Just like when I say that I have to do something, I feel tension. But when I say I get to, it's like I have choice and I have power, and I can do something that maybe really deeply resonates as a yes. And if I say I get to, but I realize I don't really want to, or there's something within me that's saying I don't need to, now I start to be restored to sanity, because I'm not running on that false power of getting it done, of workaholism and being a human doer, not a human being, So, yeah. So powerlessness, it starts off usually when people hear about this word, usually because they got into some sort of 12-step program or they went to a rehab and they were introduced to this word, that they're powerless over their addiction or their affliction or their behavior, and they're powerless over people, places, and things.
Right.
And oftentimes the people, places, and things come up when either somebody seeks help or therapy for codependency or somebody else's addiction or mental illness, or they just have, they're a fast learner in recovery and they've gotten to a point where they realize, like, maybe I'm not just powerless over alcohol and drugs. Maybe I am powerless over people, places, and things. And what does that really mean? And so being powerless with an addiction or a behavior, not being helpless, is a very important shift that has to happen for anyone to even want or even believe and be open to any kind of real help.
Right.
If somebody goes into recovery and they believe that they're helpless, their mind's going to be closed. And they could go to meetings till the cows come home and they won't hear what's going to shift their perception.
Right.
They won't have that yes come from within them. They won't light up and realize that, wow, like there is a real solution here.
I think that click of, because I think about when I first got sober and how I just wanted to be able to drink like a normal person. Not that I've ever drank like anything normal. Like I can't even have one Dr. Pepper. It has to be a 12-pack, right?
Right.
Not
anymore though.
No, not anymore. But you know what I'm saying.
She's no longer powerless over that.
I'm not. But I've just never been that person that could do one. I just haven't with anything. Even working out, I can't just do 5 miles. I have to do 15, like I do. It's just who I am. But there's a shift in this idea that I'm powerless over whatever my drug is at that time, because it means that I can't just do one. Like, and I have to know that I'm not helpless in it. Like I can put it down, but can I keep it down? Can I honor that powerlessness of it? Can I change my behavior no matter what the consequences will be by changing my behavior?
Right, you're not helpless because there's help.
Right. And I think about, I had a mentor many years ago, she was a part of my life for a really long time. And she used to say that, that I would I wanted you to help me, but I wanted you to stay away.
Yeah.
And I wanted you to help me, but I didn't want you to get close to me.
Right.
And that's another form for me of this powerlessness, because I don't know how to be me in front of you, because if you saw me, you'd run away, because that's what the story in my head tells me. It's not necessarily true, but it's what I believed for so many years, and it was that false truth that was so ingrained in me, and I'm powerless over that idea. I'm not helpless to it.
That's a really good point, and it's the idea of being powerless over your own inner subconscious ideas, that I remember when I first started doing writing in recovery, and I was concerned that I wasn't going to bring up everything that needed to heal, but I was also simultaneously terrified that I would bring up everything that needed to heal. I was terrified. And, and then there was, the concern that when I shared it with another person, that they would agree with the shitty perception I had about myself, and that would probably make me worse because of that. Because I had spent so much time in my addiction knocking back, pushing back all of my toxic thinking and trying to smoke and mirrors the whole thing, and and I got it, I'm fine, keeping people at an arm's distance so they wouldn't see the thing I'm hiding. It's I always pictured the Wizard of Oz, beware of the man behind the curtain. I was always not wanting to show anybody who I thought was my true self, but was not my true self. It was just another toxic concept of myself. But as long as I thought that that was my true self, I was going to have a closed mind to anyone really getting close to me too, and really sharing vulnerably. Even though I thought I was honest, there were things I was not honest with myself about. Of course,
Right.
Everybody lives in some aspect of self-denial, and until they're ready, they're not going to realize what it is, right? So if we're not ready yet, if maybe we have PTSD, if maybe our self-concept doesn't allow for us to go that deep yet or something, but yet these things that are on the deeper levels are driving the bus, they're making us see things a certain way, interpret things a certain way, and react to things a certain way that is not creating harmony in our life, we are powerless over that too.
Yeah.
And so oftentimes when we are speaking in recovery about being powerless, it's helpful to, especially if you have more than one addiction, the gig is up and you really do realize that,
Yeah.
It's not just alcohol, but I digress.
Yeah.
To be saying, I'm powerless over alcoholism. I'm powerless over addiction.
Yeah.
I'm powerless over codependency. I'm powerless over dysfunction. I'm powerless over the programming. I'm powerless over it, but I'm not. It's like that saying. I'm all full of sayings today, but anyway, it's like that saying that God loves me where I'm at, but He loves me too much to leave me there. And I can accept that I am powerless over the things I don't know in my conscious, in my forefront of my mind, the things I'm not aware of. I can accept that it's progress, not perfection. That if I am willing to be honest with myself, and I'm willing to be open to being wrong, and I'm willing to do what it takes to write, to talk about my feelings, to feel my feelings, to question my scripts. If I'm willing to do that, more gets revealed. And so this idea of being powerless, over the effects of alcoholism is something that becomes a lifelong journey. And it has been for me. Like I said, I have 24 years now. And more just keeps getting revealed. And I don't know, I've fallen in love with how the mind works. And everything that I learn becomes something that I feel like I can use to help another person. And so there's just this added high of the aha, and also to know that while each thing does hurt when they're on their way up, if we trust that they're on their way out, then we'll have less of this conflict, less of this, less of these toxic thoughts driving the bus, less things hindering our ability to have true intimacy.
Mm-hmm. And that's a key thing, is that idea of true intimacy, because we come in so broken. Mm-hmm. Like, we get here and we're just like, this is literally the last stop. Like, there is nowhere else to go.
Or we don't, or we still think that we got it. We just have a little problem with the drink or the drugs, but other than that, we're good. But
there's a point where, if you're in long-term recovery,
right,
there's a point where you feel like this is the last stop. Like, there has to be, otherwise you would go back out, like, otherwise you would continue to do the behavior that you were doing that didn't work in the first place, right? Mm-hmm. And so I feel like that level of intimacy you do find once you stop telling yourself all those lies. Like, you have to know yourself before you can get to really know another person. And there's another level of, powerlessness in that, and finding that.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, too, is that oftentimes we are looking for power. We're looking for power. We're looking for that feeling of strength. We're looking for that that ability, that feeling like we got it. And so we can end up vacillating back and forth between turning things over to a power greater than ourselves and taking it back when we feel powerful,
right,
and not really understanding where that power is coming from. And so the recognition of the powerlessness, and I'm a very visual person, and so I really had to understand this, because I'm also an overthinker. I don't know if you noticed, but I really had to understand what powerlessness was, because I was getting in my own way. There are lots of things I didn't feel powerless over, I thought, and definitely when I made powerlessness and helplessness the same thing in my head, it was very difficult to break that apart. So I had to focus on it to find out for myself what works for me with it. But what I came to understand over time and have settled into, and intuitively this resonates with me, and this has been what I've lived on and built on and worked with for years now, and that is that the powerlessness comes from my programming. And when I'm tapped into my programming, when I'm tapped into my unhealed thoughts, it is like being plugged into little weak batteries. And when I am detached from the story of who I think I need to be, and I'm willing to see what resonates on a deeper level instead, I tune into my intuition, my true self, my connection with God, with my higher power, and that's when I am inspired. I experience an inner knowing.
Right.
I am not trying to figure stuff out and burning myself out all the time. I am not interpreting things based on fear stories in my mind. I'm just asking myself whether or not it resonates. I am trusting in an intuition and letting go of the results rather than focusing on the results and running on my stories. And that makes me feel a sense of purpose, and it makes me feel a sense of connection.
Right.
And it allows me to live and let live, and to feel like I'm having a soul experience in the body rather than a spiritualized body experience, if that makes any sense. Like that, I'm not trying to become a better Lisa. I'm trying to awaken to the true Lisa, to the true self, and when I'm doing that, I am allowing my intuition to tell me what the truth is. And by the way, we all have the truth within us. It's all there. There's a reason why things don't feel like they vibe. There's a reason why when we believe something that's not true, it causes us so much internal discord. It's because it's out of alignment with ourselves. There's a reason why when we operate from a story of have to, or trying to like rescue someone else, or self-abandon ourselves and do something that we know is a no for us, and put ourselves in positions that we don't feel a yes about, there's a reason why that causes us grief. You know, and that is an experience of powerlessness. But that powerlessness is just a symptom that shows us that we are not plugging in, consciously being present to that inner resource that is connected to all the universe, connected to the united self of all of us, you know, to get all like foo-foo-y, but to be like, to just the energy of love and truth and joining that we experience, and we get to experience sometimes for the first time ever in recovery, where we are coming together for the similarities, and we're joining together and for the common purpose, and we are willing to hold each other's hand and walk each other through things that we might be able to help each other with, or at least learn from each other about our own path.
Yeah, and not focus on those differences, but focus on this a little bit. I love what you were talking about with connection, and I was thinking about that, like, because there's so much of us that wants to be different and wants to be not one of, you know, that to like not pay attention to the differences, but to really honor those similarities. And in the beginning, you were talking about that thinking we have, and how we all have these similar thoughts, and you know, like it's just such a beautiful thing to get to that point where you can just connect with people on the same level that you probably would have never met if your life would have been different.
Yeah,
we would have never met.
No. Even Tay-Tay and I mean, we met once. I had a meditation meeting at my house, and we met once that way, and we didn't even meet.
Yeah.
We didn't even meet.
Yeah.
She saw a story that she had projected onto me, and I was like, oh, why is she being all like that with me? And that was it. That was the end of that.
Yeah.
And then we ended up meeting later on, and it was like a story that we ran going, look at how we were that day, and look at how we are now. And it just goes to show you this one little story, one little idea of ourselves that we project out, how we have no idea,
right?
You know, and so, and this actually brings me to the next point. In recovery, we have this. We are asked to admit to our innermost self that we are an addict, that we are an alcoholic, that we are a codependent, that we are whatever. And why the need to admit to our innermost self? It is because when we are in our addictions or our afflictions, we are operating outside of ourselves. We are always looking for it to be the source of our suffering to be from outside of us, and the source of our good to be outside of us, whether it's something we ingest, or something we do, or somebody we pull close, or somebody we fix. We are wanting the power from where it is not, to come and to bring us that sense of ease and peace and comfort. And we are not looking where it is. And so we have had habits of focusing on things and using things to avoid going within. And so we run on these stories, we tell ourselves the whatever, and then we focus on something else, or we take a pill or we drink, and it's easy to believe the stories that we have running, these stories that make us feel powerless, but yet make us feel powerful in the moment, because the drug or the alcohol or whatever, or the helping the other person, making us feel self-righteous, whatever it is.
And then a victim of later.
Whatever, yes. And whatever it is, though, it is our way of avoiding facing ourselves and buying ourselves some time, because we think that the idea of facing ourselves is not going to be fun. It's not going to be good. And so we need to admit to our innermost self that we first have a problem, so that we at least start going where it's not.
Right.
So we at least start we stop turning to the alcohol, the food, the drugs, the work, the sex, the love, the people, the fixing, the codependency, the da-da-da-da-da, and say, all right, I am the common denominator. And maybe, just maybe, not saying for sure, but maybe, just maybe, I have a problem. And, you know, after talking about this for a bit, okay, I admit to my innermost self that I have a problem. Now what?
Right.
And the cool part about that, which a lot of people, especially if they're new, may not know, is that the connection to their higher power, the connection to their true self has already started. People think that it starts when they go into the process of now believing that a power greater than themselves can restore them to sanity. But it really starts because maybe for the first time, we are being honest in a way that shifts us from helpless to powerless. And in the recognition of powerlessness and the unmanageability that comes from the behavior of it, we start to go, you know, okay, I'm stomaching this. I'm starting to be in my own skin for a second. I'm starting to talk about this stuff. I'm starting to write about it. I'm starting to read about it. I'm starting to hear other people, and I'm identifying with them. And I may not choose it, may not like it, but I will say this: I accept it. I admit to my innermost self that I am powerless. And paradoxically, in the admittance of powerlessness starts the connection to the true power.
Right.
And it's not to say that people who are in recovery or the new to recovery haven't already made that conscious connection to their higher power. Maybe they have, right? But there's this need to bring the problem to the solution. There's this need to take personal responsibility and be able to finally be here right now and bloom where we're planted, to start kicking off what's going to start taking place as we work on our recovery, to have a psychic change that's going to change our relationship with ourselves, with God, with everyone else, and more importantly, with the substances and with the world and with each other, that in such a way that we don't operate from a perspective of constantly thinking of powerlessness from a negative perspective. We start to think of it from a jumping off point, a recentering, kidding, I ran the show again, starting over again. Let me constantly, consciously reconnect to that intuition, to that higher power, to being fully present and not be up here, not be up in our minds, in our heads, running the show, running the story, running on stories. And so we admit to our innermost self, and we make that connection with our true self, maybe just for the first time in a while, or maybe in a more significant way, where we're not still trying to hold out hope that we can still manage our life by using alcohol, drugs, or people, or things, or anything to avoid and to cope. Instead of running away from, we are now moving within, checking out to checking in, and being more present for the first time, maybe. And that's why initially in recovery, before people even do a lot of the other work, they start to experience a pink cloud.
Yeah.
You know, because they start to stop that tense, intense, anywhere but here, anytime but now. I can't stand this. I'm so uncomfortable in my own skin. I hate myself. I don't want to do this. I hate other people. It's their fault and whatever. And you just stop and you go, whew.
I can breathe.
Okay. What is it that's really going on? And coupled with seeing other people who seem to have been moving past it and seem to be past it, I can start to go, okay, it's safe. This is a safe place to admit this, in a place that now there will be hope. Because to admit it around people who don't believe in hope is to talk about the darkness in the dark, but to be around people in recovery who have hope, and who have the experience, strength, and hope to share, that's powerful.
Yeah. Something you were talking about with just because you don't know about your connection with your intuition before you get clean and sober, doesn't mean you don't have one. It made me think of that Footprints poem, and how it says, when you see one set of footprints, it's because I was carrying you. And that idea of like the higher power, like carrying me when I'm at my most powerless, when I'm at my most desperate, when I'm at my deepest bottom, is like freeing. You know, it gives you that sense of hope, and that it's not helpless. And I feel like that's a really beautiful like idea among all of that.
Okay. One of the things, the tool that helped me to catch myself when I am in my own programming, creating more of an experience of powerlessness, was again, I'm very visual, is to watch to see where my point of reference is. If I am outside of myself, looking at myself, judging my body, judging my life, judging my bank account, judging the way I sound, etc., then I'm in my ego. I am outside of myself looking in.
Yeah.
And when I am coming from a surrendered place, I am going back within myself again. I come from an inside out perception where it's true self first, and what resonates first, and my conscious connection with God first. And when I come from an inside out perception, I experience empowerment. When I come from an outside in perspective, I experience powerless. And to me, it's like an alarm that goes off that goes, do, wrong perception. You might want to check in. And so I'll have to pray and meditate and go, okay, show me what the truth is here, because I'm obviously running on something.
Yeah, and finding those ways to connect with that source, you know, and the, you know, one of the things that I find most appealing to you is that connection you have with God, you know, that it's undeniable, like in the way you speak, in the way, you know, you present yourself, like, you know that there is God centered in there, and or intuition centered, or higher power centered, or whatever you want to call it. I call it God. Finding that source helps all of this. Like it is what centers us. And I love that idea of a inside out is the true self, because we are spiritual beings having a human experience.
This is why so many people can have everything. They could be trying to commit suicide on a yacht.
Right.
Because they are so focused on protecting and having and being that they don't actually come from a soul first perspective in that moment. Now, they could have the yacht and they could meditate on the yacht, and they could have the yacht is a thing, but that their true happiness they know comes from within, and their yacht is just a tool to bring other people together so that they could all join together in a quality experience and they could be enriched. So it's not that the money itself is ever the issue. But when we can focus too much on the outside, on anything from the outside, when we come from our ego, when we're running on self, we are disconnected.
Yeah.
And we can only go so far before we will again feel restless, irritable, and disconnected and discontent, right? And so, focusing on the similarities and the differences in the beginning is one of those ways that in recovery we're introduced to something that is way more profound than we realize.
For sure.
Because we're oftentimes in our society, not just in addiction, comparing our insides to other people's outsides.
Yeah.
And again, everybody's so focused on what everybody else is doing. You know, I mean, go on social media and it's like a compare. If you're not really centered and you're coming from your right mind in it. But what I was told, and what helped me a lot in my own recovery, because I was very, very, very much doing that, was eyes on your own paper, Lisa. Eyes on your own paper. Like, everybody has their own lesson. Everybody's going through their own school. And the things that you think are going on in somebody else's life, you have absolutely no idea what's going on in theirs. And so rather than think that you want somebody else's life, or think that you're better than somebody else because of the life you think they have, realize that you don't actually know what their whole life experience on a deeper level is. And recognize that your life is your life for a reason, and for a really good reason, and fall in love with your own life. I think that a lot of times our powerlessness is because we are not falling in love with our own life. We're not being present. We're not saying, this is exactly where I want to be. This is exactly what I need to be doing. And trust that. And it could mean that you're going through an illness. It could be that you're I've had epilepsy, as I said on previous episodes, where at one point I was seizuring on a daily basis, and the way that I would talk about it, I would say, okay, God is putting me in timeout, and I have to reboot like a computer, and then I would come back like I just slept. And so my interpretation of it and the way that I described it helped me to be in love with my life, even when I had something that other people would be tempted to go, oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't want that interpretation. I want to be positive. I want to be solution oriented. I don't want to be problem, magnify, And so, eyes on my own paper, live my life in a hula hoop, recognize that my responsibility to other people, especially when we're codependent and we think that we are powerful over other people, we recognize that, you know what, everybody has their own journey. We have our journey. And so, we stay in our own hula hoop, and we give from our overflow. And so by doing that, we trust that whatever they need will be provided for them. And when they're ready, that strong soul that every one of us has will rise up and seek the teachers for each level of the experience that they're going through. And so, it's all like, appearances are meant to deceive, man. Like, it's very, very, very difficult, if not impossible, to look at anybody in this world and say that we know everything about them and what they're going through.
Right.
And even more so, and more importantly, that we know what their highest good looks like. And if we're really honest with ourselves in our recovery, and we've admitted our own powerlessness over drugs, alcohol, etc., we recognize that we don't actually know what our highest good looks like either. Yeah. And there is such an exhale in that. There is such a letting go in that in the admittance of powerlessness over people, places, and things, in the admittance of powerless over the things that are maybe deeper down that are driving the bus, that are yet to be revealed, in turning that over to a higher power and allowing him to walk us through the classroom of our life, helping us to heal, in letting go of the substances and trusting that we are going to that we'll have everything we need as we lean into people in recovery, and we use the tools, and we learn more about what's going on with us, and we share, and we write, and we use more of that. And so, the idea that I don't know what anyone's highest good looks like in form, I don't know. I really don't. It allows me to trust my intuition that if I'm guided to do something, it's for everyone's highest good. Yeah. Because I'm tapped in deeply to what we're all connected with, that yummy soul stuff. Yeah. And so, oh man, this overdeveloped sense of responsibility gets to be put down. Right. This helpless, I'm not enough, gets to be put down. And I get to be equal with everyone else. And there's something about the similarities, not the differences. There's something about the common purpose. There's something about joining together. There's something about that mutual support. There's something about the lack of judgment when we feel a feeling and we have the ugly cry. There's something about that really allows us to get off our own hose and try and stop trying to be someone that we're not, so that we can experience our lives and move past our own internal powerlessness, clear up through writing and sharing and amends and anything, but truly clear out what's blocking us from the sunlight of the Spirit, so that we can experience being inspired. And there's nothing more powerful than seeing the light go on in another person's eyes, and knowing that there's something that your experience, strength, and hope has been able to do to connect to theirs, to be able to help them in their life.
Yeah, that's a really great, sentiment of what it looks like when, that spark, because we think of our higher power as within, and to see that higher power light up in someone else's eyes. I know
the light goes on.
Yeah.
So where's the light coming from?
I have
Exactly.
it's ironically my health card from before I got sober. And whenever I look at it, my skin is yellow and my eyes are black. And I feel like I can visibly see that light now, and it's something that was missing for so long. And so I feel that, in that power.
It's so powerful because when you're in recovery and you see the light go on in someone else's eyes, they don't even have to say anything. Based on their demeanor, based on the softness of their shoulder, based on the excitement in their voice, based on the attitude, the solution-based attitude that they have. But you get to see you get to feel the presence of that power. Whereas when we are upset and we're angry and we're running on a story and we have I know-itis, where we go, I know.
Yeah.
Yes, I know I need to do that. I know that's not yes, okay.
Because I know everything.
I know everything. And what happens with that is you could see their light too, shrunk and dim and dark. You see them not feel like they're lit up. It's almost like in Christmas where you have the lights on the tree or outside of the house and they're off. They're there,
but they're off.
And and then when they get plugged in, they light up.
Yeah.
And when you see somebody who's moved through something, it's like the same stuff could be happening in their life, right? And usually is.
It's just
and yet their attitude is completely different.
Yeah.
And so what really is the issue? The issue is always the main problem, which centers in our mind. And so, it's also very powerful that when people first get into recovery, that they think that the problem that they're powerless over is, alcohol or drugs or whatever. But the fact that alcohol or drugs or food or sex or whatever is only mentioned in the first step, and that really the main problem centers in the mind, and that the solution is to connect to a power greater than ourselves, and the method is to clean out whatever blocks us from that power, and to get self-honest, and to really go within and to be more present. When we realize that the solution to powerlessness is to be present, to be honest, to be connected consciously, to have all that stuff that we're running on that's making us shrink when we see a person or anything, to have that cleared out, to have a transformed narrative of each of these things by even doing amends. What ends up happening is that everything could be the same in a person's life, and that person can end up having a transformed experience, that they could be in the same situation or around the same people and not need to use alcohol or drugs.
Yeah.
To have a spiritual awakening is to move from our head to our stomach, to our heart, to our gut. And if even the word God because lots of people have issues with the word God, I always like to say intuition and gut, because nobody can argue with that everybody knows when they feel something's off, or when something's good, or something's a yes. So what else? Let's see. I think that the idea of being helpless is without hope. And powerless it could feel like helplessness, but powerlessness to me is like having the sun in the sky, but having clouds blocking it. And the sun is there, but we can't see it because our thought clouds, our stories, our ideas of what we think needs to happen are blocking us from seeing the sunlight, right? And so it is so powerful that we could block ourselves from our own intuition or use that same power to tap in and experience our true power. So I've learned, beat to your own drum, find out what your yes is, find out what you like. I remember when I first got into recovery, I didn't even know what color I liked. And because, I was like, what do you like?
Yeah.
If I was around a whole bunch of people and purple was my favorite color, purple would not feel like my favorite color. If everybody else liked blue. It was just the way that I was. I wanted to be part of, and I felt like I was terminally unique. I felt like there was something inherently wrong with me. I had so low self-worth.
Yeah.
And but to recognize our differences and see them as the way we self-express with our connection with our intuition. So we are looking for the similarities and we're joining with each other and we're appreciating the differences and not seeing them as being better than or less than. We're beating to our own drum. We're right-sized. We're following our intuition. We're following our own inner compass. And life goes from being something that we have to work through and endure to an adventure. And the whole narrative of it moving into being an adventure is a very empowering experience. That, wow, even the things that I have to heal or the things I come up against are opportunities for me to shift something and to learn something and to experience something, and even to experience a part of myself that I haven't experienced before, with people who I've never even met before. And I also feel that as I keep releasing and healing, I get to meet people who have also similarly aligned with their true selves, and I get to have different conversations and meet wonderful people who have had the courage to question, to question themselves and had the courage to be true to themselves. I wear my own style clothes and I don't care what anybody thinks, because I have gotten to a place where I feel like the way that I am, the way that my hair is, the way my body is just my own art, my own expression of myself. Whereas if you would have seen me, even when I was a model, I was so insecure. That I was so afraid of what people thought. I was always looking for approval. I was always looking for all the time. It was hard. And that's powerlessness, like powerlessness over people's opinions.
Yeah.
So yeah. So we go through and we let go of our shame tapes. We let go of the stories that we're running on, and that helps us to free ourselves.
Mm-hmm. I feel that is something that I'm trying to navigate at times, is those shame tapes, because I still feel that a lot. Like I still run on some of those stories and have to rein it in and really be present. And I don't know that I always do that 100%, but I'm that's something that I'm really trying to work on this year, is not living in that, because that is where I tend to fall off of what I'm trying to do as far as being present and honest and connected, because I lose that connection. I will lose that connection if I run on shame.
Yeah. Lots of times when somebody might be upset with us, it triggers some stories and we go into this reactive self that is no, that's not true, and blah, blah, blah. And we're not able to pause and be present and ask ourselves if that's really true or not, you know? And so everything that, even the conflict that happens, becomes an opportunity to go back and revisit it and say, what was that? Mm-hmm. One of the things about addiction is that people who don't understand addiction, or really most afflictions, is that they think that if the person was smarter, if the person worked harder, if the person loved the other person more, or if they loved themselves more, if they were stronger, if they had a different life or a different job, a different wife, a different husband, a different house, a different situation, they could be sober. And so they would tell the other person, I don't understand. I don't understand why you drink. I don't understand why you use drugs. I don't understand this. I don't understand. Why don't you love me? I don't understand. Don't you love yourself?
Yeah.
Like, what's wrong with you? Like, oh my God, like, I could put it down, like, but you're weak, and all this lack of information about what the real issue is something that gets internalized a lot in somebody who is an addict or an alcoholic, etc. And the understanding of what alcoholism is, to learn about alcoholism is to recognize that there are doctors and there are dropouts. There are people who are beautiful and successful, and there are people who are struggling in that area. I don't know how to say this. On and on and on and on and on, right? So there are people who have loving spouses, sometimes a little too loving, a little codependent, but and then there are people who have people who don't care around them. And we have in recovery people from every walk of life. And because the issue is not any of these things, it is sometimes we are the most intelligent people in the room, and yet we couldn't put the substance down. It has nothing to do with any of those things. It has to do with the behavior, the powerlessness of avoiding going within, of believing that we can't go within, of having a story about who we think we are that's too bad to go within. It's having a story of who we think we're supposed to be. It's being checked out. It's wanting to be checked out. It's believing we need to be checked out. It's wanting to fit in outside of ourselves, even if it means to abandon ourselves. It is that thinking. It is the thinking that makes us powerless, and that is why it's recovery that brings us back to the power that we need. And so if you're new to recovery and you've heard anybody tell you that you would be sober if blah, 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 just understand that it is an inside job and it has nothing to do with those things, because somebody can be too smart for their own good. Mm-hmm. And so it has nothing to do with being smarter and being sober.
Yeah, definitely.
So, So thank you so much for joining us today. This was a very powerful episode for us to share about.
I loved it.
Feel very inspired. So if you are someone who is new to recovery, or maybe struggling in recovery, or maybe, you're going through something in recovery, because we go through waves of our healing.
Right.
And we go deeper, as Tay said, the onion, layers get peeled. Just ask yourself, if you're feeling that sense of helplessness, of hopelessness, of powerlessness, what really is going on? Are you running on a story that maybe you can question? Are you attached to certain results that maybe you could detach from and recognize you don't necessarily know what your highest good looks like in form? Do you have expectations of other people that maybe not based on reality and are setting yourself up, as they say, expectations are premeditated resentments? Are you basing your serenity on temporary things or on things that don't matter? Are you increasing the importance of something to a level that it's not and shouldn't be, because how important is it? Are you basing your self-worth on other people's opinions? Are you experiencing the ism of alcoholism, which ISM stands for I in search of me? So honesty, most important, and recognizing where we're really at, blooming where we're planted, and understanding that if we trust in our intuition and we want to focus on the solution and we're willing to be wrong, miracles happen, and we start to recognize that we are on a soul journey and the blueprint is within. So the opinions expressed here are strictly those of the people who gave them and do not represent any 12-step program or should replace your own intuition or professional medical advice. You can watch us on Facebook, on YouTube, on Amazon Fire TV. You can listen to us on the PHLV radio app. You can get our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. And thank you again for joining us today on The Real Recovery Show. We'd like to give a special thanks to our sponsor and gracious host, PHLV Radio here in Las Vegas. If you want to see any of our other episodes, please click on themeetingspace.com, and all of our episodes are there. And if you'd like to join us on a future episode, fill out an intake form there as well. See you next week.